Hello, Incredible Moms. This is Crystal Evaristo with the Incredible Moms podcast, where we discuss getting pregnant, being pregnant, having babies, being a mom, and so much more. We hope you enjoy the show. Hey everyone, back after a long hiatus. Today I'm going to be speaking with Jennifer, and I'm super excited to talk to her today because she is a labor and delivery nurse, and she is also a surrogate. She just delivered, maybe 4 weeks ago, and she also has children of her own. So I'm really excited to share her story today. Hello.
Hey, it's Jennifer.
How are you?
Good. So a little introduction of myself. My name's Jennifer, and I have 2 kids of my own, a boy who's 10 and a girl who's 6. And then I just delivered a 3rd baby via surrogacy, little boy. And so basically it's going to talk kind of more focused on my first pregnancy, as I had a traumatic birth experience with that one that led to some PTSD, and then a little bit on the surrogacy. So backtracking, 11 years ago when I got pregnant with my son, we weren't planning on having that pregnancy. My husband was in the Army in South Korea at the time, and I had just lost my job thanks to the government cutting contracts. So came out to South Korea to join up with him and got pregnant that night unexpectedly. I didn't even think there was a chance we were pregnant. I had a neighbor friend who was scared that she was pregnant. So I was like, okay, buddy support system, I'll take a test with you. And I was the one who turned out pregnant.
Oh, jeez. It's like a typical movie.
Yeah. And then we were in the crud stage. And so thankfully, because initially we were going to try to have a kid at that time, but then we changed our minds on it. And it's like, God had other plans for us.
Oh, yeah.
We ended up halfway through the pregnancy getting moved to Kansas, where there wasn't really, I was wanting a much more natural birth experience with a midwife and birthing center and everything, and they didn't have any of that there in the area. So we did an Army hospital birth, and that was fun to say the least. Mm. So I was the crazy nut job that my mom was coming up from out of state to be there for the birth. So I was like, okay, here's my due date. Let's take some castor oil, get this baby out. And it actually did work for me. I got very nauseous, threw up, and that's when my water broke.
Oh, geez.
And then go to the hospital. And at first, because we're like 30 to 40 minutes away from the hospital, so there was some bloody discharge. And I called them, and they're like, well, you just had an exam a couple days ago. It could be from that. And they're like, go ahead and wait till you fill up a pad. And then we decided, no, we'll just go ahead and come in anyways. And thankfully we did, because halfway through the drive, I start contracting, and I'm having double contractions back to back with each other and everything. And by the time we get there, it's starting to get painful, where I'm having to, breathe through it and everything. And when I got into their little triage room for them to examine me and everything, that's when I found out, oh, that was my water that had broke, not just me urinating myself with throwing up. And so they said I was either 5 or 6 centimeters at the time. Ooh. And so the nurse asked the doctor, she's like, well, so what's the plan? And she's like, well, we're not going to send her home. She just had a very bad attitude at the very beginning. And I had already decided right then and there, no, I do not want this provider delivering my child. I just got a very bad impression from her. She even chewed out the nurse in front of us for giving her the wrong size glove. Like, she just had a very bad bedside manner. And so at one point we did ask for a different doctor. And then the doctor comes in and she's like, I heard you want a different doctor. And we're like, yes, please, type thing. And she's like, well, I'm sorry, honey, but you're all I've got. I'm all you've got. And I was like, okay. And so here I am. We had got there about 12:30, I believe it was. And I started progressing so quickly, like very shortly after getting there, I was in transition. And with wanting a very natural birth style, I did a lot of research ahead of time. And so I was very confident, once I was in it, it was a whole nother story.
Right.
And everything I had asked for, like she was telling me I was backed up, and I was like, well, should I get an enema? And she's like, we could get you that. They never did. I was like, I want a labor bar. They're like, okay, we'll go find it. They couldn't find it. I want a labor ball. Nope, you can't get out of bed because we have to make sure the bleeding is from you being ruptured. Which now, as a labor and delivery nurse, I just realized how bogus of a
Right.
reason that would be to confine a woman to bed. Like she wanted me on my back, flat on my back the whole time and stuff. So my anxiety's going up as everything in my birth plan is going out the window. Anything I ask for to try to help me through this process is not being given to me. So my anxiety's through the roof. My mom, I'm like shaking really bad in the bed. And my mom tells my husband that I'm in transition. And like I said, doing the research, I knew what that meant. But once I was in labor, all I was focused on is your first labor is an average of 10 to 12 hours. I can't survive this. I've only been at it for maybe an hour at best.
Right.
So I'm freaking out. And I was like, I just have to survive until 7 o'clock when the next doctor comes on too, is the other thing I was thinking. So I'm just all sorts of anxiety and everything. And then when it comes time to push, the nurses were in there with me initially, and they're inserting their hands and helping kind of stretch my perineum and stuff. And that did not bother me one bit. Well, I guess because when I started pushing, I guess it was so effective that they went ahead, got the doctor in immediately. She comes in and she tries to do the same thing. But this woman has very, very thick hands. So when she's inserting them in while my baby is starting to crown, it hurts. And my reaction to pain in that area is I kind of kick my legs out. So I'm kicking my legs out, and she's yelling at me that I need to stop doing that, and actually gets up in my face and tells me I'm going to snap my baby's neck if I keep doing it.
Ooh.
Which post-delivery with so many different providers I've seen since then, I've shared my story with them, and all of them agreed there is no anatomical way that I could have snapped my baby's neck during delivery just by kicking my leg straight out.
Right.
But
it's not
that
like
is
you're
what
like crossing them over the baby's head or anything.
Right.
Oh my God.
And then on top of that, with my first pregnancy, I was all baby. There was no extra fat. So those monitors just slip and slide off your belly real easily. She gets up in my face and she's basically telling me that I'm doing a poor job, and that in addition to snapping my baby's neck, she's like, listen to that monitor. You hear it? And she's trying to tell me that my baby's like flatlining type thing, and that we need to get the baby out. Yes. So with the excruciating pain I was in, I'm assuming because of that, it had overridden all my senses. I could barely hear, I could barely see, and I could barely talk. Like I could see just a pinpoint in front of me. It sounded like I was underwater, and that's one reason why she had to get up at my face, to get me to be able to focus on her and hear what she was telling me. Mm-hmm. And then I could barely verbalize anything at all. I could once in a while muster out like one word whispers to my husband. And so she's just telling me how bad I'm doing and that my baby is going to die. Well, backstory, my husband, if I remember correctly, was nearly stillborn after she had like a 2-day labor with him. And then his brother, if I remember correctly, did require resuscitation at birth. So in my mind, I'm like, look, if you think I'm doing this bad of a job, let's go ahead, do a C-section. But like I said, I could not talk. I could not verbalize anything. So my way of letting them know that I was going to give up is I just kind of leaned back, closed my eyes, and they thought I was needing oxygen and passing out.
Oh,
so she started putting oxygen on me, and I'm like, no, that's not what I need. But thankfully, all in all this happened so rapidly. The pushing phase was only 30 minutes with him, and he came out, thankfully, and came out very beautifully. He was just a little bit quiet. He wasn't one of the screamers. And so then the doctors are hysterical, and she's got all this mess on the floor, and she's trying to rush him over to the warmer, and the nurses take him away from her and make her get back to me. And later I found out that that was a very like kind of forceful, the nurse stepping in being like, give me the baby type thing. I couldn't tell that in the moment, but that's what my husband and my mother told me afterwards. And
like, calm yourself down, we'll take care of this.
Yeah. And so I did have a 1st-degree laceration that she had to stitch up, and that was excruciating. Like, I've had a lot of my friends tell me that once their baby came out, the doctor was so quick and efficient that they don't even remember getting stitched. And I was like, no, I remember each time that needle touched me. I don't think she numbed it with anything. And afterwards, it was still this feeling of defeat, like I was going to be responsible for my baby's death. So they had asked me, within the first hour or so, if I wanted to nurse him. And I knew I needed to nurse him. I knew I needed to have him skin to skin. So I agreed to it, but there was like no bond felt at all. And it was just, I was doing what I had to do. And the whole time there, it just felt very surreal, a lot of things. And so I felt also just like a bad mother for not feeling that instant loving bond you hear Hollywood and everybody talk about.
Right.
And so we were there since he was delivered at 3 a.m. We actually stayed a little bit past the 48 hours mark for a new mom just because of the time it was. And then we get home and things are going okay. And I mean, I see this kid and I love this little baby because it's a baby, but I still feel no maternal bond to my child and stuff. And so I take care of him. Things are going good. We're in a state where I don't know anybody. Like I said, we just transferred here, midway pregnancy. So once my mom went back home, I had zero support system. My husband was a first-time dad where he had zero interest in a newborn. It took until he was a good 6 months and was more interactive for him to come around. So like the first couple months, I'm just not having any support. I had met a couple moms in our FRG group, and I start talking with one of them, and I finally open up to her. I was like, I feel so horrible because I know this is my kid, but I don't feel like it's my kid. And she's like, oh, sweetie, that's perfectly normal. And I was like, what do you mean? And she had that same experience. And then she starts telling me how she's talked with a ton of other moms. I was like, how come nobody has said this to me? I was like, here I am feeling absolutely terrible for not having this bond. Within about 2-3 months, I did get that bond. It did eventually come. It just took a while. Yeah. And then I did find out later that is a perfect normal response. Everybody, their hormones and stuff, they all have a different reaction with it. And so that was one good thing. But before I even hit the 6 weeks postpartum, I'm sitting in my living room and I'm holding him watching an episode of Friends. And it's the episode where Phoebe gives birth. The second she's in labor and she starts pushing, I could tell immediately something was wrong with me. And I put him in his swing and I just go out onto the porch and get in a fetal position. And I'm just crying my eyes out, having this complete kind of panic attack episode. It had sent me completely back to my birth, back to this feeling of I'm going to kill my kid because of how I was just doing a horrible job. And just that whole wave, I could not control myself. Thankfully, like I said, the second I started feeling it, I put him down. I had at least enough sense to do that.
Yeah.
And by the grace of God, my husband had got off work early that day. And so while I'm just having this complete episode on the porch, he drives up. And so he's like, what's wrong? And I can't talk. I can't function at all. And so he goes in the house because now he's freaked out thinking something happened to our son. Finds him, he's okay, the dogs are okay, everything's okay. So he comes back out to be like, what's wrong? And it took me quite a while to calm down, probably not as long as I remember it being, And then I finally just tell him what had happened. I was like, everything was fine. It was just, pleasant day. But the second that came on, I just went into this complete episode. And I tell my doctor this at the postpartum visit, and it's a different doctor because it's Army hospital, different experience, different provider every single time you walk in the door. And she immediately just stops everything to listen to what I'm telling her. And she's like, I'm going to be right back. And I didn't know, but she had went out. and went and actually talked with the nurses and stuff and found out a couple of them had been on shift the night I was delivered. And she had talked to them and they kind of confirmed what I had told them about the provider and stuff. And so then she actually just walked herself over to the patient advocate and talked with her, comes back to the room, introduces her to me, and is like, here, she's like, here's contact information, you know, we need to get this taken care of type thing and stuff.
Wow.
And then I started to feel a little bit better because then I started to realize, okay, this wasn't all my fault. You know, it wasn't what I remember happening during labor. My reality is skewed by how the doctor was responding. And my mom and my husband both tried to tell me there was never anything wrong during delivery. My mom has been in many deliveries with family and friends. And they kept trying to reassure me that I did an awesome job. Everything was great. We just had a bad doctor. And it took finally other professionals that were there agreeing with that for me to actually believe it at all.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, my perception, my reality was I was about to kill my kid during delivery based on my actions and stuff. And so once somebody else agreed that was in the room that this is their job and they know what they're saying, you know, was agreeing on my family side that no, it was fine. It was the doctor. I started to get a little bit of relief with that. And so me and my husband, we had to write up statements and an investigation was opened. And you never get to know what turns out of those investigations on the patient side. So I never heard anything after the fact. And I did reach out to other moms and I was like, look, I'm not going to say anything publicly. I know some people have bad days, but if anybody has anything about this provider, here's a patient advocate you need to get in touch with. And to my understanding, a few of them did come forward. They ended up reaching out to me privately and sharing me their horrific birth experiences with her. And that also once again started reeling back in, okay, this happened. It wasn't my fault. I didn't do wrong. This was the provider type thing. And like I said, never heard anything about it. A couple months later, I'm watching TV again. And it's I don't remember what the TV show is called. Maybe it's called Birth Story, but they just keep highlighting different birth stories that they go and videotape and everything. And once again, once we got to the delivery room, I just went into a complete panic attack. And I'm just in a fetal position, just scream crying and everything. So I'm like, I was finding out, okay, my triggers are birth.
Right.
Like I can't even watch a fake birth or a real birth without just completely falling apart and stuff. And so when I would share my story, even I would just start breaking down typically about it because I would be remembering it. And so I was like, I need to get help because this isn't getting any better. And I call to get a consult for a therapist. They give me a phone number and I reach out to them and I'm on the phone call with them as they're like, okay, well, tell me what's going on. And I have to go through my entire story with them. And so I'm crying on the phone with them. End of the conversation, they tells me, okay, well, we're going to see who's good to match with you and give you a call back to schedule an appointment. I was like, oh, so you're not even the therapist that I'm supposed to be, having this session with, and now I have to go through this again.
Oh, jeez.
So then they book me with an appointment. I walk in and the person was running late and then comes in. And so once again, I have to say my story all over again. So I'm just all in tears in this room with this person. And then once again, okay, yes, I do believe this person will be a right fit for you. I was like, wait a minute, you're not even the person I'm supposed to talk to.
And this is again? Military too?
This was a private post.
Okay.
Yeah. And they're like, well, we just don't know exactly where to fit you because it's not postpartum depression. It is PTSD that you're having from, what we can tell. And we treat PTSD, but we treat it for soldiers coming back from war and everything. They didn't know how to address PTSD from a traumatic birth. And so I was like, okay, great. And so then I wait to try to schedule the next appointment. I was like, I'm done with this office. And so then I reach out to, I I think I reached out to the doctors at the Army base or whatever, because then they put me in touch with a gentleman that's another psychiatrist that he does some sort of like light therapy with his PTSD patients. And he's like, I don't know if it will end up being effective with you, but this is where we can start and stuff. And so I was like, okay. And then I had called a couple times to try to get the appointment scheduled, and it just kept getting pushed back. And so I was like, you know what? I'm done. I can't keep going through this. So I gave up on seeking professional help after it had been about 4 months of just back and forth, different providers, and just not getting anybody to actually just give me an appointment. Let's talk. Tell me how you're going to help me. Tell me what I can do to get past this. And once my son was a year old, my husband got out of the military and we moved back home. And so there was a local postpartum depression group here, and they were more targeted on traumatic births and stuff. And so I went ahead and joined up with them, shared my story. At this point, actually, this was probably after a year or so that we moved back. I'd been sharing my story with other people privately, and just talking over it again and again made it get easier. I was still tearing up, but I could get through it now. Mm-hmm. And that was helping. Oh, I'm so sorry. I should have backed up. When he was 5-6 months old, it was January, my friend went into labor at the same hospital. And so I was up there with her. And the nurse that was seeing her looks at me and she's like, I remember you. I was like, uh-oh. You either remember somebody because of a good experience or a bad experience. And I know that whole night was a very bad experience. And I mean, so I was just like, oh gosh. And she just has this warm, loving smile on her face. And the best word she could have ever told me, she says, she's like, you'll be happy to know that doctor no longer works here.
Oh, good.
And I was like, thank you. That was like my closure. That was a very healing moment for me because it just solidified the fact that everything was okay. I just had a doctor who was not. And then I get to see her, and I even told her that I was struggling with it. And she's like, no. She's like, that was a textbook delivery. Everything was going perfect. She had no right saying the things that she said. And I was like, thank you. I was like, you have no idea how much. I was like, thank you. And that I can't tell you of all the things anybody could have done for me in that moment, just to let me know that, yes, an investigation was done, because like I said, they can't tell you the result of it. And thankfully she was found at fault, obviously.
Yeah.
And there was enough grounds that she was also removed from that hospital. So,
wow.
My husband and I, we toyed with the idea because initially we were really wanting to even try to take this to the medical board, mm-hmm. And after fact, I kind of sometimes wish I would have done that. I know she's still practicing, and I just maybe hope that was an eye-opening experience for her, and hopefully maybe she did improve stuff since then, Maybe she could have been a great doctor in a different field, but you have to have a better bedside manner than she had for her.
Right.
Because labor and delivery is such a mind game. You can have everything in a row going beautifully, but if mom is not in that right mental state, you can end up having an emergency because she doesn't work to get that baby out. Like, you have to have that mother have the confidence and equip her so that she can do what she needs to do to get this baby out healthy and happy, and stuff. And so it's like, that's one thing that I do with my patients. I see how it's a mental mind game with them. And it's like, look, it's like, let's do this together, and I do my best to advocate for them. And like, okay, what do you want to do? And as long as, it's not going to hinder anything and it's safe for baby, let's do it. Because whatever I can do to put you at ease, that's going to help you calm down and your body produce the right hormones to help make this a better experience for you and a safe one.
The doctors that you work with, like through the military, are they like a family medicine type doctor, like, or are they obstetricians?
I believe they were obstetricians. I know there were also nurse midwives.
Okay.
And so the one that I saw for my postpartum visit, I believe she is a nurse midwife, if I remember correctly. She might be OBGYN.
Okay.
So they had a little bit of a mix there. So, because I mean, it's fairly large base. So, I mean, they had, like I said, so many providers. Every prenatal was a different provider.
Yeah.
I was just like, this is crazy. I was like, the good thing with it is hopefully I would know who would be delivering my baby. And then that happened. And it wasn't even somebody I had ever seen at any of my prenatals. So, yeah, there's quite a few of them there.
My sister
and she was an OB herself. I remember that because I looked her up later.
Okay. And my sister lives in Washington. Her husband's in the Army, and she was having some mental health things going on, just like depression, anxiety, or whatever. And they just really did not help her at all. And just, I know just from that aspect of things, even just going to the doctors for a sinus infection or something is an issue most of the time. So I can imagine what OB was.
Yeah, and that's sadly what the psychiatrists and stuff had told me. They're like, we know how to treat soldiers. We don't know how to treat moms. And talking with other moms after the fact, they all agree that like around the military bases, there really is not a good support for pregnant women and mothers. They know how to do soldiers. They just don't know how to do regular civilians.
Yeah.
And it's a very sad fact. And I hope more is being done to help with that. I think, especially just with the social media, it's a killer. It has so many faults, but one thing it does have is it really does help connect all these moms together. And so that was part of my healing, is just going and talking it through again and again and revisiting it. And that support group that I did end up joining, I ended up basically just sticking around because I was like, I finally do feel healed. I know with PTSD, you never are truly 100% healed. You can always end up having a setback. And I did after my daughter was born. Her and my son, they're almost 4 years apart. And she was somewhere between 3 and 5 months old or so. And I usually, I know they say don't do it, but we do a lot of things doctors tell us not to do. And I would put her and her little bouncer on top of the counter while I was in the kitchen cooking or cleaning. And one day, I hate to admit this, but I had forgotten to snap her in her little seatbelt. And I turned around to go to the trash can to put in just some trash, and I hear a splat, and it sounds like a meat patty hitting the floor. I turn around, my adrenaline's running. This is before any of my, nursing school I had zero medical knowledge at this time. I pick her up. I go sit at the couch. I look her over, trying to see if she's okay. Once I realize, okay, she's breathing, nothing looks out of place, everything looks fine, nothing's broken. My son was in the living room with me, and I told him, I was like, go get your dad now. Because I felt it coming on. Because once that adrenaline rush was over, then it was kicking into gear. And I sat her down. I went straight to the room. And he comes in the room and he's like, what's wrong? I was like, call my mom now. And thankfully, now we're back home. And my mom only lives a couple miles down the road from us out in the country. And so she comes over immediately. He takes care of the kids, and I just have a complete meltdown again. Well, I was like, because it was just this, it's just this feeling of I'm going to be the result of something happening,
Yeah.
And it brought it back. And thankfully that was 2015. And that's been my last episode since. So,
great.
I was like, things have been going good since then, but I do know that, just because like I said, I had a few episodes within the first year or two he was born, and then nothing for a couple years. And then finally just out of the blue that happened, and it gave me my little trigger. But everything has been great since then. With my daughter, I decided, I was like, I do not want a hospital birth. I was like, I was so traumatized by that first experience. I was like, I do not want this at all. So we went with a midwife, and a professional midwife had a birth center out here. And I told her my story at the beginning. And I was like, I'm just so worried about getting into labor and having like flashbacks or something, you know? And the way she phrased it, she's like, you need to reclaim your birth. And I was like, that's a really good way of putting it. And so she's like, well, you know, you are the driver, you know, whatever you say, that's what we'll do type thing. And my daughter came so fast, furious. She was born just a hair under 10 minutes after we got inside the birth center.
Oh, jeez.
So there was no time to worry about anything, because that one, I had an hour and 45-minute labor with her and just 3 pushes or so, and she was out. And so that one went so fast. And then I got her skin to skin. I immediately felt that love with her and the bonding and everything. And I was just really proud of that experience. And I was just so happy that nothing did happen. You know, I didn't have any setbacks. Had another first degree tear, but wasn't as bad. So no stitches there. Just had to be careful for a little while. But it went so much smoother. Everything went beautifully. I got my boy. I got my girl. So I'm like, we're good. Our family's complete. And then I just did my best afterwards to kind of reach out to other moms too. Anytime one of my friends were pregnant and stuff, I would always give them the heads up. Look, if you don't have that wonderful Hollywood experience at birth of this is my baby and this is all wonderful, it's okay. I was like, this is one of the things that people didn't tell me, and I wish they would have told me, you know, and stuff. And so I just became very passionate about everything pregnancy, labor, and delivery. I would always try to research things. My friends would ask me stuff, and I'd be like, hey, let me look that up, you know. And so I was like Dr. Google for them. And I just bought different books, and I always try to stay up to date on whatever I could find out, you know, like, oh yeah, this was the recommendation, but now it's not, you know, and stuff. And so a lot of my friends would reach out to me anytime they had questions, and they'd be like, but check with your provider, you know.
Typical nurse lingo. But yeah, make sure you check with your doctor.
And so it's like, I just became so passionate about it. And I mean, those nurses speaking up and advocating for me and the whole process, that just really, you know, became very close to my heart and stuff. And so I actually ended up receiving a calling, and eventually one day I'm going to be a nurse midwife. I'm paying my dues. I've got the RN, going back to school right now for my bachelor's, and then we'll transfer to become a nurse, go to midwifery school. And that's just where all my passion is. And so like with my patients, I give them kind of the same spiel too when I'm introducing myself and everything. And then I let them know, hey, and if it doesn't happen, it's okay. You know, there's a few things that I'll just tell them. And I had one patient tell me like, oh, good, because I was so worried about that and everything. And I was like, don't be. I was like, whatever happens is how it's supposed to, you know. I was like, I just try to really advocate for them. I have had patients that didn't want certain interventions that were kind of getting pushed on them, and be like, okay, let's talk it out. And I get right on their level, sit on the bed with them, and just listen to them, you know. But advocacy is my biggest thing now, just because I saw just how much that helped me.
Yeah.
And so I want to do that for somebody else.
I feel like that's awesome as like even like as a relatively new labor and delivery nurse, because I feel like I didn't get those skills until at least a year and a half in, maybe, just because like you just kind of unsure of yourself and you know all that, and you're like, well, do I have like the balls to like go and say no, you don't need this? But now it's, you know, it's a little bit different, but I get it. Like it's good that you kind of go in with that automatic, like, this is my intention. I am going to advocate for these patients, even. That's awesome. I had a patient that I was not her delivering nurse. I just took over baby for the recovery period. She goes up to postpartum, comes right back down. And
everybody was like kind of warning me about her. I was like, okay, this is going to be fun. I was like, that's okay. I was like, I can deal with complicated people. Like even before medical, I've had to step in sometimes when my manager couldn't handle the customer, like I can deal with difficult. I have some very difficult family members. That's given me a lot of experience. And so I was like, I got this. And I go in there and this patient, she's just all in a frantic about everything that's going on. And I was like, okay, let's talk about it. And then I go back to the provider and I'm like, look, I know you have spoken your piece with her and I've listened to her and she does not want this. I was like, I explained some things to her and we talked about it. I found out why she's worried about it. So she just wants to delay the treatment to see if things get better on its own type thing. And he's like, well, I can't approve that. He's like, but we can't do it if she doesn't want it. And I was like, I know. So I go back in there and I was like, yeah, he's not recommending it. This is not the agreed. I was like, but I let him know where your stance was. And so if you want to still wait, we can wait. I was like, he explained the risks to you. You agree that you understand what those risks are. And so we just sat there and we waited. And then when things didn't get better, she finally did consent to treatment. But when she consented, she was at peace with that decision. Right. She had got what she needed to agree that that was the appropriate treatment, and she felt much more settled in doing it. And she, by end of shift, she was back to being her bubbly self, and stuff. And I was like, that's what I love about my job. I love being able to help diffuse a situation and help make it better for somebody.
Yeah.
I was like, I want them to have a good experience. I had a terrible experience the first time, wonderful experience the second. And I want to give that wonderful experience to all my patients if possible.
That's awesome.
Not everything's going to go perfect, but
right.
we can tackle those complications as they come and help resolve to make the best of it in the situation. And so I just, like I said, just huge advocate for people now and stuff. And so like, if I ever hear anybody's having issues and stuff, I'll be like, look, go reach out, talk to a patient advocate. I was like, if you really don't agree with how things are going, take care of you first.
Yeah.
I just wish there was more education for mental health than there is, and it has been getting much better through the years. With social media, it's opened up much more platforms for people to come out and speak up. And I see some improvements with it, but we still have a long ways to go. And I just want people to have that comfortability to know that it's okay. These feelings that you're having, it's perfectly okay to tell somebody about them. There's a lot of hormone issues afterwards too that can play into that and stuff. And so it's like some people do end up needing to get medically treated for it, and others, they just need like cognitive behavioral therapy, or some people just need to be able to vent. Right. And stuff. I want people to be able to come forward and understand it better and it not be such a taboo thing. It's no reflection of you as a person. Right. It's just everybody's different. Everybody processes everything differently. And I just hope more women go and get the help that they need with it.
I don't know if you listened to any of the other episodes, but I had a girl named Amy on quite a few episodes ago, and she had severe postpartum depression, and she actually had to be treated inpatient for a couple of weeks. And it's a great program, and we're lucky to have it in North Carolina. But I even as a labor and delivery nurse had no idea that this program even existed. So it kind of has to start from us as labor and delivery nurses all the way to postpartum care too. For sure,
most definitely. And that's the thing is, though, there are some resources. And then usually half the time we don't know half of them.
Right.
So like where I live, there's this website, 903help.org. And so it's supposed to be where different organizations can submit to and so be your one-stop shop for, this county, whatever different types of resources are available out here and stuff. And so I was like, that just needs to be like everywhere, like old school white pages, but for social work, right. That everybody could go to and just be like, okay, I need this. And it be there because there's a lot of resources that typically most people don't even ever hear of or know about.
Right.
until finally they find somebody. Oh yeah, I went there before. And it's like it takes too much work to try to find those resources than it should. Going into my third pregnancy, with it being a surrogacy, I had multiple agencies tell me no, because you do their questionnaire without any explanation and they just see, okay, PTSD, and they immediately wrote me off. And it's like, okay, but let's look at this. Okay. And so once I would actually get to talk to a provider during the screening process, they're like, yeah, this was situational. This isn't like postpartum depression. That's going to be an ongoing issue.
Right.
And you successfully did have another birth after it, been X amount of years without an episode. And so then they're like, yeah, this is no problem. They're more concerned with the actual postpartum depression because of it being a more hormonal response that isn't, what's the word I'm trying to say? Kind of like an isolated event,
Right.
This is something that can go and end up causing even more issues and stuff. And so once I could explain what the situation was, they were perfectly okay with me and stuff. And so I initially tried to do like a agency, and I was working with one lady, and then I guess you can say I'm like a little bit of a control freak because like I would have to go to her to have the conversations with the parents, and everything was going through her initially. And I didn't like that because I'm like, okay, is she relaying what I'm saying correctly, And so I didn't like having to have a middleman. And so I split off and went for independent route, where I matched myself with the parents and we handled everything without going through an agency to handle the logistics.
Oh, okay.
And I loved that a lot more because, like I said, I got to be hands-on. I got to control the steps, the process and stuff. And so it's like, okay, we need to book this appointment. Let me call and I'll get it done. I actually enjoy doing that. So when I looked at it, I was like, what is the need for the agency then? They're basically there to mitigate if needed and to just handle the logistics of scheduling everything. I was like, I can handle that. And I like that better because my schedule is so all over the place. Being a nurse, my hours are never consistent, that they would book an appointment and be like, oh, no, that's not going to work. I'd rather just call the clinic and be like, okay, yes, this works or not,
Right.
Instead of all this back and forth.
Were they out of state from you?
This couple was not. I initially did match with a couple from out of state. We just had a disagreement when we went to the contract stage and working that out. We agreed on everything. And then this one last little thing was the deal breaker for them.
Oh, bummer.
So, and it was such a great match. Like, there were so many similarities that we were just instantly bonding. So both sides, we were sad when it broke, but we're like, it's better that we do, because everybody has their deal breakers. And I was like, and nobody should ever have to compromise those, if that's what you feel. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up matching with another couple that was just only 2 hours away from me. And so that has gone great. This was their second child, so they had done this before. So they were completely comfortable with doing it independent. And right before transfer, I got COVID, so we had to delay transfer.
Oh, geez.
And so I had just started the meds, had to come off the meds, wait until they would give me the clear to do it again. And so like 2 or 3 months later, we finally got to transfer day. And since I had to drive to their clinic, I went ahead and stayed at their house with them to make sure we weren't late for the appointment and everything. So that was our first time getting to actually bond with each other and get to know each other better. We had met each other once over dinner, but this was like time we got to actually spend together. I got to meet their other son, and he's so adorable. Mm-hmm. It was a lot of fun. And after that, your first trimester is very uneventful typically. And so it's like, yeah, we just go to the appointments where they ask me if anything's different. I say no. And they're like, okay, see you again in 4 weeks. So they would come out to the important visits like the ultrasounds, but all the routine prenatals, they stayed home for. And I was like, there's no point in coming. I mean, It was a drive for them and stuff. And so we weren't super close, but we friend each other on Facebook. And so we'd get updates on each other and I would text them. I would do my best at least once a week to give them an update of what I was feeling at the time. If he was starting to kick or when I started to feel hiccups, and stuff. And so I tried to involve them as much as possible. But then once we got close to delivery, that's where the conversations, of course, started picking up a lot more. And we started talking more through the phone. And this baby just threw me for a loop compared to my two. I never had false alarms with my kids. And this kid, the 3-4 weeks leading up to the due date, I was just like, is this about to be labor? Because I had been contracting with him, those Braxton Hicks, but then they would get regular. They would start to get a little bit more intense. So I'd be like, oh, is this going to be it? They're only 2 minutes apart, but it's not like really painful or anything yet.
Especially with your fast labors.
Yeah. My son was a 3.5-hour labor. My daughter was an hour 45 minutes. He was out in 30 minutes. She was out in less than 10 with pushing. So I was always so nervous because them living 2 hours away, I was like, this baby's going to be born before they get here if I go into labor. The joke was that after I had my second one, they told me that the midwife is going to have to live with me because I'm going to sneeze and the baby's going to come out. So every single time these contractions picked up, I'd get so anxious of, okay, should I call them? Should I not? And so the awesome thing about being a labor and delivery nurse is I work where I'm going to deliver. So I would text my coworkers and be like, okay, is one of the good rooms available right now? Okay, try to keep that one open. I was like, it might be coming in soon. And then nothing would happen. And I'm just like, okay, I'm going back to bed. False alarm. And so I initially was very anti elective inductions. I don't like them personally or professionally. And so if there's a medical reason, I totally am on board with that. But
like a legit medical reason too, not just
exactly.
Well, they had one high blood pressure in office.
Yeah. And this baby on ultrasound was measuring in the 97th percentile. Ooh. So then I'm like, I don't want to go too far past my due date. But once again, I'm standing by, not really wanting to be induced. And then once we got that second ultrasound that said 97th percentile on his head, ooh. My doctor, she looks at me and she's like, you sure you still don't want that induction? And I'm like, I started thinking about it more because I've had big babies. My first was 8'10", my second was 9'4". So I'm like, I'm not scared of a big baby. My mom birthed a 10'4", got him out in just a couple pushes. I was like, I'm confident that we have the baby making hips to do this. However, the entire pregnancy, this boy had been OP, so sunny side up, facing the wrong direction. And for those who don't know, when the head starts to descend through the pelvic, it ends up not being able to descend as well. Baby can get stuck. It's a lot more painful for mom. And OP babies are actually becoming a lot more common. A lot of it has to do with our lifestyle, the way we sit. And so our pelvic bones are just a little bit twisted. And with mine, I could also tell the ligaments on my uterus on one side were tightened because I could tell where my uterus was a little bit shorter on one side and longer. And that also attributes to having an OP baby. Oh, okay. And so I was just like, okay, so I was seeing a chiropractor, trying to do all the spinning babies things to try to get this boy to turn. And he just would not do it the whole pregnancy through.
Like too big.
Yeah. And so I was like, you know what? I was scared with an induction until he was properly turned. And then I'm talking with my chiropractor and he says, yes, there's a few things we can try and your hips are starting to spread beautifully. So that started to ease my anxiety. I talked to one of our providers who was a longtime nurse midwife and now is OB. And she starts explaining the different types of pelvic structures, how I probably have this one. And then she starts actually going into detail about how most of them will start OP and then turn as they're descending, that he probably won't be engaged, especially with me being not a first-time mom in pregnancy, that he probably won't actually fully engage and turn until I'm in active labor. And then she starts talking about different signs and sensations, the mother would experience. I was like, you know what? That really sounds a lot like my first and a little bit like my second. And my second, she was actually breached literally until hours before I went into labor.
Oh, wow.
Was breached the whole pregnancy through and then finally just flipped at the very end, and she didn't engage until right when I went in labor too. And so I had just had an appointment a few hours before this. I was like, okay, well now I'm feeling more confident. Okay, maybe this boy, he's just going to get his act together at the end. I was like, more than likely that's kind of what happened with my first two. Everything went smooth and well with them. So I was coming along to the idea of the induction, and then with me starting nursing, my bachelor's for nursing, the class I had, if you miss one class, you have to repeat. And then with the parents being 2 hours away, I was like, maybe it is better that we just go ahead and get this scheduled. So I finally agreed to be induced, but I didn't want any of the interventions. So it's like, okay, well, how do you induce without inducing? And so we didn't even have a plan of how I was going to be induced until I got there. And I talked with my coworker and I talked with the doctor, and I'm like, okay, so I don't want my bag to be broken because I know once you get artificially ruptured, you're on their time clock and then there's no going back. So if it's a failed induction, we're going to end up with a C-section now instead of being able to get home and try this again another day. So I didn't want that. The medications, like Cytotec, I was like, we talked about that and we're like, yeah, I'm already, I'm up there contracting every 3 to 5 minutes at this point. My contractions spontaneously started to pick up before I went in, but I don't even notice them most of the time.
And so I was dilated?
I was at 3 centimeters and I think 80% effaced. I just wasn't making any other progress after that. So it was just kind of stuck there. I mean, you could be at that, a month before you deliver.
Right.
So I didn't put too much stock in it, but now I'm looking at the fact that my contractions are frequent. So if we give me a medication like Cytotec, there's no going back from it. You're going to have to give a different medication to counteract it if it makes you have too much uterine activity. So I didn't want to do that. So we talked Pitocin, and I'm like, I hate Pitocin so much. I was like, it just feels like those babies were constantly having to chase on the monitors and do other interventions when we put that in the picture. And they're like, well, your first 2 labors have gone so smoothly, so quickly. And, this isn't your first rodeo, so we're going to be very conservative with your Pitocin because you're probably not going to need that much. I was like, okay. I was like, and at least with Pitocin, you turn it off 45 minutes later, it's basically out of your system. So I was more amiable to that idea. And so that's what we started with. And I think we got going 10 in the morning, and the dads got to be there because we, scheduled induction. And so we're just all hanging out in the room and having a little bit more bonding time than we've had before, Nothing's happening for hours. I was like, yep, she's increased the Pitocin a few times on me and I'm feeling no different. And I'm like, I got the wireless monitor. I'm walking all over my unit in my room. I'm bouncing on the ball. I had my husband help me with different positions in the bed to try to get him to turn because he's still OP. I'm like, I'm just so confident. I was like, the second he turns, it's going to be, game over and this is going to be done. I was like, I just need him to get in the right position. So I kept trying to get this boy to flip and he just wouldn't do it. So she came in about 3:00 in the afternoon to check me. And she's like, well, you're at a 5. I was like, but still my contractions, I wasn't feeling hardly. And just nothing was really happening. And so I was like, well, I don't want to be ruptured unless he's fully engaged. And she's like, well, he is now. I was like, well, okay. And so fun fact, my daughter, her water never broke. So she was born in her sac.
Oh, nice.
And with my son, his water broke, and that's when everything started after. So I'm thinking in my mind, I was like, well, maybe that's just what I need to get this show on the road, to get my body to start contracting, to hopefully force him to work his way down and in the right position. So I was like, okay, let's just do it. So she breaks my water. And that was a very new experience because with my son, after my water broke, I went into transition so quickly, like I don't remember the sensations of having your water broken, just leaking on yourself. And then my daughter, it never happened. So this time I'm like walking around, I have one of those, Depends diapers on. I'm like, okay, this is a very weird sensation. And I would be talking to the dads, and all of a sudden everybody would see me scrunching up my face. I'm like, this is so awkward to just have a conversation with somebody and feel like you're peeing yourself. I did not enjoy that part of it. But he went ahead, he put on, one of the dads put on a playlist and started playing some music. And so I just started trying to dance through it. And sure enough, within half an hour after the water broke, that's when the contractions finally started to actually get painful. And so I was like, okay, this is all good signs. It sucks, but it's a good sign.
And the only time you want pain.
Yes. And that's what I kept trying to remind myself. I'm like, okay, pain is good. Pain is good. And I would be so trying to focus on my body and what I was feeling to feel, okay, is he turning yet? And then I would notice, okay, my back pain's decreasing. So maybe he's actually starting to turn now. And then the pain got so severe, I finally threw up. And then when I threw up, it felt so much better. And she's like, yeah, because you're pushing through the contraction a little bit. I was like, okay. I was like, I want to push. I was like, I don't fully have the urge to push, but I'm having so much intense pain at this point. And I was like, I just need a little to get through. And then the doctor came in because she knew how fast my labors were previously. And they let me push. I was at a lip. And so she went in and she helped push the lip behind his head. And we got fully dilated at that point and stuff. And so it's like something felt off a little bit with the pushing. And I was like, okay, let's get the mirror out. I didn't have the mirror with my son, but they let me feel his head as he was coming out. And then that helped motivate me. And so it's like, I wanted to see it as a motivation. Being a labor and delivery nurse, that was probably a bad decision because I'm pushing and I'm watching, and I know as a labor and delivery nurse, different tell signs of effective pushes. And I can feel that these are not effective. I'm not feeling any change with them. And then just seeing no change just made me so angry. Oh. So I was like, get rid of that. And so she just threw the mirror across the room type thing, just rolled it away from me. And I was pushing and pushing for like half an hour, and I'm like, what is wrong? I was like, I pushed so well with my first two kids, and I feel like I'm not pushing well at all this time. I'm not feeling any change with it. It doesn't feel like I'm doing anything. So I'm getting a little discouraged, and they're telling me I'm doing great. And I'm like, yeah, that's what we tell all our moms. I was like, I know the truth here. I was like, it's not going good. And then finally, I felt like this pop sensation. And she had said something about, like, before she said it, I could tell I felt him rotate. And I was like, thank God we're at the end. He's finally rotated. No, this little boy, he had all along started to rotate into the right position. And that pop was him flipping back to the wrong position.
Oh, jeez.
But finally, he got low enough that I could actually finally start to feel him. So another almost 30 minutes of pushing. And when he started to crown, I got stuck there so long. It felt like I knew just kind of averages with what my patients are. I was like, okay, he should be out with the next contraction. And then he wasn't. And then he wasn't. And then he wasn't. Just like, what the heck? And he finally did come. And I mean, it took everybody in that room to help me get this boy out. It was hilarious. The whole time I had been getting into so many different positions, and my doctor, oh my God, I just absolutely love her because, sadly, the reputation of doctors in hospitals aren't very supportive of natural labors.
Right.
They want you on your back in the stirrups. And when I told her, I don't want to do that, I want to either go side lying, squatting. And she's like, we can do that. And then sure enough, when the time came, I am so grateful. I have one picture of the entire labor, but it is the best picture ever because it's me turned around backwards in bed, kind of in a kneeling position. And she's right up on the bed with me with the drape, adjusting to every move I make. So
wow.
Every time I change the position, she'd adjust the drape. I mean, she's literally on the bed, kneeling with me in the bed, ready to go. and stuff. And that just shows her support of her mothers, and everything. And I just absolutely love that picture. Of all the pictures I have, that's probably my favorite from every delivery and stuff, because it just shows her compassion and everything. And the final position I was in, it was like kind of side lying on my side, but I'm like perpendicular in the bed where my head is like falling off. And so I have one of my nurses holding my head up for me, another nurse helping with my leg, my husband helping with my other leg, and then my doctor at my feet, because with one of my legs I was pushing against her and she was helping to push back and stuff. And so it was just like I had 4 people holding different limbs of mine to get me in the position that I felt was actually doing change. And then I was in so much pain that I couldn't even move my body. Like after each push, one of my coworkers, she's like, "Are you sure you didn't get an epidural?" I was just like, "Yes, wait, I can't do anything." It was like, "I need you to move my head back. I need you to move my arm." I'm like, I could not do anything for myself at the end. And then when he finally came out, they make the comment of just how crooked he was. So not only was he sunny side up, but he was what we call asynclitic, where his head was at an angle coming out. And we had this gigantic 97th percentile head. Like he ended up measuring, I think it was 14 and a half inches on his head.
Oh, wow.
And it was all kind of lopsided when it came out initially because of
The big
pushing
lump.
in that crooked. Yeah. He was a bit crooked and everything. I was like, okay, now it makes sense why I didn't feel anything initially, because of just how malpositioned he was. I was fighting against that. And so I was like, okay, so everything I'm feeling, it all, came full circle, made perfect sense to me at this time. He came out, went immediately with his skin to skin with his dad's after they, just gave him a quick look over. And it was an awesome feeling, because everybody's like, well, aren't you going to be worried about feeling a sense of loss after the delivery and everything? Like, because you've carried him for 9 months. I was like, yeah, but he's not mine.
Everyone
and I kept telling everybody
that.
Yeah. I was like, he's not mine. I was like, I'm here just to be an incubator,
Exactly.
And I had several surrogates tell me that just with like the wave of hormones that they have, it's a very conflicting feeling, because some of them would feel a sense of loss, but then rationally they know, they're so happy for the parents and that this isn't their kid. So they're detached, but not fully detached. And then once their hormones regulate, all that goes away and everything's fine.
Right.
And when he was born, I had no sense of attachment to him. And I was so grateful for that I didn't have to worry about that and stuff. And so even the parents are like, do you want to hold him, after, it had been like an hour or two. And I was like, sure. But honestly, to be truthful, didn't have a desire to hold him even. And stuff. And so I got to hold him for a little while. And then one of those afterbirth contractions came. So I was like, here, you hold him. I was able to pass him off. And then that was one of the best things about this delivery is I got to be selfish and focus on my recovery. I didn't have to worry about a newborn, and I could just focus on myself. And I know that might sound bad to some people, but it made for such a more relaxing recovery and enjoyable recovery, frankly. I mean, with pushing out that giant boy, I had the worst hemorrhoid of my life. Like my husband said, it looked like a sausage, and even my doctor said it was bad. And so I had pain with that. And for like 6 days, my tailbone felt completely bruised. And the chiropractor, he's like, did they do any imaging to see if maybe you have a fracture? I was like, no. And by a week, the pain had went away, so I wasn't too worried about it. It was probably just pretty bruised from pushing that boy in that. Yeah. And stuff. But like, it was just so nice. I was like, they were in their own room. I was in mine, and I would go back and forth to visit. But, when I had enough, I got to come back to my room and relax. And that was a very wonderful thing, and got discharged. Now I've been pumping since then. So it's kind of like a newborn in the sense that I'm having to wake up in the middle of the night to do all that. But like I said, it was just a beautiful experience. I got to help develop this baby inside of me, give him to his parents, who they're just over the moon and happy, and they're so adorable with him. And the older brother. The older brother was like kind of scared of him at first. It was kind of funny. But he's warmed up, and they're just this happy family. And then I get to be home back with my family and getting back into a normal routine for the most part, minus the pumping. And it was beautiful. And like with the pushing, there was a point where I was just like, why would I wish this on myself? Why did I agree to do this, go through this pain? I am crazy. I was like, I'll never do this again. And within an hour after delivering, all that went away. It was just like, oh, that wasn't that bad.
You're like, do you guys want siblings? More siblings?
I thought I could do this again. Now that was their last embryo, so
okay.
they're done. But yeah, now I'm looking at, okay, as long as everything heals properly within a few months, I plan to start looking at doing this again, you know?
Wow.
So like my husband had initially, he wasn't on board with it for a couple reasons. And then afterwards we talked about those, and I'm like, well, yeah, with this being my first surrogacy, there was some growing pains and stuff. And so next time we know better. Like I didn't have chiropractor in my contract, so that was out of pocket for me, because I was like, well, I didn't have it with the first two. I don't need it this time. With having that OPDB, I sure did.
Right.
So it's like there was a couple things I tried to help save them money on, and I cut out of my contract because of it, because I was like, well, I didn't have it with my kids. Why would I charge somebody for it, you know?
Yeah.
And so, but then this time, just being older, you know, you're not as it's not as easy to do things when you're pregnant the older you get.
Definitely not.
And stuff. And so it's like, I just need a little bit of extra help around the house and stuff. And so there's just a couple things that I wish I would have put in my contract that I didn't have. And so we're like, okay, we'll make sure to put it in this next time. And that should alleviate some of the inconveniences it caused for my husband, I guess you can say.
Right.
So
now when you were like in labor, and like, you know, pushing and all that, the dads were just like right there, like all in there, like, you know,
oh yeah,
not caring.
Yeah. And that's what I thought was, they were kind of excited and nervous about, because with their first surrogate, it was a planned C-section.
Oh, okay.
And so they, you know, had never been in a vaginal delivery. And then especially because it was a gay couple, both men, this was a whole new ball game for them. Right. And stuff. And so that was also something that helped make it special, because even though it wasn't their first child, it was their first vaginal experience. And so as his head was coming out, both of the dads got a little bit teary-eyed and stuff with it. And so I thought that was kind of sweet and everything. So it was just a very special moment. And I mean, we still keep in touch with Facebook. I mean, it's only been a month, but we have plans to meet up again and do like a little barbecue reunion with his first surrogate and stuff, and just kind of keep in touch.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's been like almost 6 years now. We still, you know, not nearly as much as we used to, but email a lot. I mean, they're way better than I am. I'm terrible, but it's just, you know.
Me too. And that's one thing I made sure to warn them when we were in the matching process is like, I don't mind if you want a super close friendship, or if you want no contact during the delivery, whatever's not delivery, but through the pregnancy, you know, because different parents have different expectations. They've gone through different experiences. Some have gone through tremendous loss that they don't want to be involved because they don't want to be let down again and stuff. I was like, whatever relationship you want, I'm comfortable with the caveat that I am not so good at keeping in touch. If the other person reaches out, I'm great. I was like, but if you expect me to be the one to reach out all the time, it probably ain't happening. My dad has to call to make sure I'm alive every couple months, you know? So I let them know that. And so, yeah, like we're on Facebook. And so they post little updates and I'll reach out and stuff. And so we'll talk a little bit here and there. But yeah, I don't think I could see how over the years, you know, that kind of just dwindling, especially since they don't live right here. So,
right.
But yeah, it was beautiful, and I hope to do it again as long as everything recovers well. So
good for you. I don't think my body could handle another gigantic baby. So.
Oh, this next one will definitely be the last. I have no intention of having more than 4 pregnancies.
Yeah.
It's just, again, just being the L&D nurse, you know the more bad outcomes. You know,
right.
you see that side. and everything. So I'm like, yeah, I think 4 is a good number.
Yeah.
I don't want to stress my uterus past that.
Exactly. And those big babies, they like tear your ligaments from inside out. So it's, yeah.
Oh yeah. That was one joke I made with my husband. I was like, you know what, this next time I need to have like an Asian baby or something that's going to be tiny. I was like, I am tired of these giants. I want to know what it's like to birth a normal size human baby. I was like, let's look at what their genetics are, what their birth weights are next time. Make sure, hopefully we're going to get a tiny baby.
Sometimes I think it's like, they're like, oh, you just have a really healthy placenta. Because my biggest one, which is my 3-year-old, was 11 pounds, 12 ounces.
Oh, good gracious.
Yeah. And the surrogate baby was like 9-12. I'm like, that was easy. He came out. I had to like hold my legs still for the parents to make it to the room because it went so fast. And I just like, oh God, I can't. I just can't. Because, we were big babies, my husband and I, but like they were not big babies. Like she was a preemie and he was average from what I hear. And I'm like, why did you have a 9-pound, 12-ounce baby? And I don't have gestational diabetes or anything. So I just don't
That
get
was
it.
one of our patients. She had 3 or 4 births, all within like 6-7 pound range. And then she had polyhydramnios, so her belly was like extremely large and somehow did not ever measure large on the baby. And this baby came out nearly 10 pounds.
Oh, wow.
And we're like, how did this? No, it was like 10.4, I think. And I'm just like, how in the world do you go from having 6-7 pound babies and this last one so gigantic? And it was no diabetes, nothing at all abnormal in the pregnancy aside from the polyhydramnios, which is usually with gestational diabetes.
Right.
But like I said, her sugars had been great. And then this baby comes out so huge. And we're just like, and she pushed it out so well. I was like, you go, girl. I was like, I don't know how.
Mine was like, they broke my, like I was stuck at 3. It was an induction because I'm like, you are not going to let me go past my due date with this. Like, you just not. Because my one before that was, but like my kid was 10-8, my second one. So I was like, I can't keep doing this. Like, it's going to ruin me. And they're like, okay, we'll induce you 1 day before my due date, mind you. And I was stuck at like 3 centimeters forever and ever and ever. And then they're like, well, let's try breaking water. And baby was still like up high, but they're like, one last ditch effort because this baby's not coming out. Yeah. And I had him 45 minutes later. And,
oh, goodness.
I had an epidural. I'm not as strong as you. And I think I pushed for 7 minutes, and it was more just
That's
me
awesome.
Screaming him out because my epidural failed. So,
oh no.
Of all the times to have an epidural fail, I did not want it with my almost 12-pound baby.
Oh goodness.
But yeah.
Go ahead. I had a primip that her epidural failed at the very end, and that baby came out a little over 10 pounds and shoulder dystocia. I was like, of all times for epidurals not to work, this is the one that it should have been working for.
Right? Oh man. Well, I wasn't a labor and delivery nurse at the time, but I remember my midwife, my nurse, like my midwife had used her body to push my whole leg back. I swear to God, it was by my ear. And I had no idea, like, what are you doing to me? That hurts. She's like, I know, just keep pushing. And I'm like, but it hurts. Like, she was probably trying to get the shoulder out.
With yours?
No, I don't think so. But I think she was just, they saw how big the head was coming out and was like, oh, crap. Like, we got to get her legs back. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you for listening.
All right, talk to you later. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this incredible mom story today. I really hope you enjoyed it and that it may have helped you in some way. Make sure you rate and leave a comment so I can be sure to bring you the content that you really want. Please follow the Incredible Moms podcast on Instagram, where you'll also be able to find many updates and episodes. I can't tell you how much I appreciate any support. Stay tuned for another Incredible Mom next week.